Welcome back to Direct Station, where politics are in retrograde. I am Kate Carey. If you've been wondering why your president is telling pregnant women to forego a common painkiller, or if you've been wondering why a Homeland Security memorandum making claims of an emerging terrorist movement on the left felt more stark than other steps this administration has taken, or if you've been wondering why the cancellation of an American comedian was weirdly, wonderfully, quickly defeated, or why your president fired a U.S. attorney, replaced him with his private insurance lawyer, and then finally got his wish to indict the former head of the FBI. Or if you've been wondering why this particular week, this particular set of escalations feels like an almost unbearable, certainly unsustainable pressure, a pressure that brings a deepening fear and anticipation with it. Well, naturally, there is an explanation in the cosmic weather. Let's talk about it. For those just tuning in around here, hi, I'm so glad you're here. Around here, what we do is we track what's happening with the humans on the ground and wonder what's brewing in the sky to try to make some sense or some meaning of it all. Here's how it'll work. You will tolerate slightly more astrology than you would in your day-to-day, and I will provide you with a new way of looking at or reflecting on what we're going through. You do not need to believe in astrology to enjoy this or get something out of it any more than you need to believe in the weather in order to enjoy a day in the park. So first we'll look at current events. This week it's the pressure cooker environment we're in. Then we'll look at the planetary patterns going on up there. Then we'll look at the history of those patterns. What was happening down here the last time some of these aspects were going on up there? Then we'll reflect on it. We'll use some wisdom from seers and sayers who've come before us, and we'll come up with a very short list of what the hell to do with all of this week. And finally, we'll end with some poetry because, well, you oughta. Come on, it'll be fun. So let's talk about what actually went on this week, because the escalation in energies, the pressure that is building has been a lot, hasn't it? Something insane happened every damn day. This latest phase started late last Saturday, September 20th. Trump posts a directive to Pam Bondi demanding she prosecute several of his enemies. In other words, before the week even began, we had him violating the wall that should stand between any Justice Department and any president, demanding that the Attorney General prosecute James Comey, former head of the FBI, Letitia James, the AG here in New York, and Adam Schiff, a senator from California. The very next day, the 21st, Trump said into a microphone at the tent revival / memorial service for a murdered white supremacist activist, quote, "I hate my opponents and I don't want what's best for them," end quote. The day after that, on Monday the 22nd, RFK and Trump announced that Tylenol is dangerous for women to take during pregnancy and they should just, quote, "tough it out." In other words, these two men announced that it'll be necessary for childbearing women to suffer the aches and pains of life as the host to a parasitic thing slowly growing and asking their organs to create more and more and more space for it, said the loving mother. There is some pain involved, and toughing it out not being something that either of these gentlemen do or have done historically. It was odd advice. It was an odd unscientific creation, right? But on the same day, happily, Disney announced, after significant economic pressure from the public, that Kimmel would be allowed back on the air. Tuesday, the next day, September 23rd, Trump is at the UN railing at the delegates about the scourge of migration and green energy. He told them that he's really good at this stuff and that they are all going to hell. He also ranted about how the UN headquarters would have been better if his company years ago had won the build for it. You could have had marble, he said to all of the leaders of the world. Anyway, later that evening, Kimmel does return to late night. Humor as Resistance comes back online, impressing everyone with his charm and his vulnerability and his authenticity and his audacity. The viewership for his return show was about 7 or 8 times higher than his usual audience, and within days, all boycotts against him had faded. So now we're at Wednesday, September 24th. The next angry and lost young man with a gun strikes the next facility, shooting 3 people and killing 1. J.D. Vance, though, makes unhinged emotional remarks online, blaming violent anti-law enforcement rhetoric from Democrats and picking fights online about it with anyone who says, maybe this isn't the day for those lies. But then, y'all, on Thursday, the big day, September 25th, something significant in the life of the United States justice system shifts. James Comey is indicted. In other words, what Trump demanded on Saturday manifests by Thursday. But that's not even the biggest news. On the same day, Trump signs National Security Presidential Memorandum number 7. This is a scary and upsetting memo that carries a lot of legal weight. See if you find yourself in this list that the president articulated in the memo. Or see at least a perverted inversion or just kind of gaslighty treatment of your ideas or your values. There's also this weird use of the word anti that they apply to a bunch of sort of traditional American ideas, as if to say, as George Bush once did, if you're not with us entirely, you are against us. So if you're not here for what we are, then you are at best adjacent to criminality and danger for the homeland. Truly. It reads like this, quote, "The anti-fascist lie has become the organizing rallying cry used by domestic terrorists to wage a violent assault against democratic institutions, constitutional rights, and fundamental American liberties." Pause. Who is assaulting democratic institutions and constitutional rights and fundamental liberties, right? Okay, but it goes on. Common threads animating this violent conduct include anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, and anti-Christianity, support for the overthrow of the United States government, extremism on migration, race, and gender, and hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on family, religion, and morality. The groups and entities that perpetuate this extremism have created a movement that embraces and elevates violence to achieve policy outcomes. Who does that? Anyway, they go on, including justifying additional assassinations. Extremism on race and gender. Think about what that means. If you advocate for racial justice, you are an extremist. You are adjacent to violence and crime. If you support trans rights, you are an extremist adjacent to violence and crime. If you advocate for migrant rights, you are an extremist adjacent to violence and crime. If you work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, you are adjacent to violence and crime. This whole paragraph describes my career personally and that of almost everybody I know and care about. Wild. It's a wild situation in which we find ourselves. Stephen Miller, though, stands in the Oval Office that day and says, "This is the first time in American history that there's an all-of-government effort to dismantle left-wing terrorism." That's not true, is it? We, living in this time, are not as precious as Miller would have us believe. There were, of course, the Palmer raids that look so much like ISIS activities now. There were the Red Scares, the Lavender Scare, and even the counterterrorism campaign after 9/11 that targeted so many Americans. So no, it's not the first time, but it sure is happening again. So by Saturday, we turn the page again to the next escalation. Trump posts the following. At the request of Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, I am directing Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, to provide all necessary troops to protect war-ravaged Portland. He does mean Oregon, and any of our ICE facilities under siege. He also said, I am also authorizing full force if necessary. That same day, Saturday, the Daily Caller, an online news platform, or at least news adjacent platform, founded by Tucker Carlson, publishes a piece calling for blood in the streets. It's worth telling you a few of these sentences. Quote, this is from the former editor of the Daily Caller, now the editor at large of the Daily Caller. Quote, "We need to reinstitute a public debt for antisocial and subversive behavior. In my opinion, some of this cost needs to be summary and ultra violent. Is this a call for violence? Yes, explicitly it is. The law is not enough, or it is non-existent. Somewhere deep down inside, we've always known no one is coming to help. We need to help ourselves." They're not pretending anymore, you know? In 1 week, we went from tweets demanding prosecution to the criminalization of beliefs or words, to an indictment of a political enemy, to a declaration of a necessity for blood in the streets. That is not gradual authoritarianism. That's a pressure cooker being turned all the way up. When we look back on this week, though, it's important for us to notice and take some new level of comfort in the ways in which the American public is also beginning to lose patience, tolerance, the extent to which the people who voted for Trump are losing their ability to suspend disbelief, the extent to which political and economic scholars are beginning to name a giant that is slowly but surely awakening. The New York Times shared the results of a focus group with young Trump voters who have changed their opinion of him, saying things like, I wanted change, but maybe I didn't need this much change. Another named the moves by the administration as a bull in a china shop. They wanted transformation, but they're getting potential explosion, right? Between them, these young Trump voters named the administration's choices as aggressive, reckless, overpowering. Robert Reich, a leading economist and voice of clarity and truth as each turn of the situation unfolds, this week in his Substack asserted a new idea. He said, you could almost feel the great sleeping giant of America open an eye and frown, then blink both eyes and sit up and stretch and then roar. What the hell is going on here? Later that day, Heather Cox Richardson agreed with him and stated that she'd been expecting this reaction for years and is not surprised, especially as we enter the fall, where a lot of the economic policies that the administration has put into place are starting to pinch. And well, aren't you so curious if there is an explanation for this mounting pressure and the way it feels like it's starting to get an almost appropriate response from the electorate? Let's look. So what is happening in the sky that makes this week feel like everything is building and building, almost too fast to manage? Okay, so to start with, I'm going to tell you that we have the Great Flying Wedge of Chaos. This is a phrase given to us by the great Austin Coppock. The Great Flying Wedge is this triangle formation in the sky that is really the background and centrifugal force behind most things that are happening this year and next year. That great flying wedge has come together and stuck together because while these planets all move at different rates and back up and go forward and back up and go forward, they all happened to pack up their bags at around the same time and move to new skylands. Like all at once, these independent journeying planetary bodies happened to cross into new territory at about the same time. And that syncing up, that sudden coherence in their movements is impactful for us here on Earth. I want you to imagine like a jazz band that like kind of goes off and is riffing. I'm not a huge jazz fan, but when I'm watching it, I understand the beauty and the intensity and the skill and the magic of it all, because even when I can't follow what is happening and where everybody is, all of a sudden, I don't know why, but all of a sudden all the instruments suddenly start cohering, right? And I start being able to hear something familiar. I start being able to hear a sequence, or even if it's not familiar, I know that it's an intentional part of the music where there is an expected formation in the sound, right? And everything kind of syncs and it is recognizable usually. That's what happened here, right? So these planets are all kind of chaotically moving at their own rhythm, at their own pace, in their own orbits. And then months ago, they all kind of started to sync. And then they finally all moved at the same almost-ish time into new skylands. And when one planet does that, one planet moves skylands, it's a big deal. But if they do that at the same time, and there are these outside, slow as molasses planets that affect all of society, that create eras and epochs, and they just keep jostling around on and through and back again at those doorways between worlds, between skylands, while you get the kind of situation that we have now. And I'll say it every time we discuss this. It is for the first time ever that this has happened. So for a long time, astrologists, who I remind you are first and foremost scholars who tend to be deeply intellectual, historical, and philosophical, dating back decades, they've been looking ahead at the situation where everybody is just crossing into new skylands at the same time. And for decades, they've been saying, oh my God, what is that going to be like, right? They've been wondering, they've been imagining, and now here we are. And it's not just that you've got a bunch of dudes in new houses, which is plenty. Moving is exciting, right? But it's a lot. You've also got these dudes who are therefore all around the same degree, all around 0, 1, or 2 degrees of their new skylands, depending on how fast they move. Or when they go backwards, they're at 2, 1, 0. Sometimes they cross back into the old place, 29, 28 degrees, right? So they go back, they get the last of their belongings in the old place, they pay the last of their bills, they say goodbye to the last of their neighbors, and then they head back. So then they go back 29, 0, 1, 2. You see? So they're all, guys, all dancing back and forth across these doorways to new worlds. When they go backwards, we fall back into old patterns and resolve, finally, theoretically, old patterns from that last skyland. And when they finally move for real, it's go time in the new land, okay? And because they're all at those specific degrees, they're all talking to each other at 28, 29, 0, 1, 2. Planets at similar degrees tend to have intense conversations with each other, and those intense conversations affect us here. Like, I'm on first base, you're on second base, he's on third, this one's at home. We're all at these critical angles in the baseball diamond, right? These points in that diamond that matter to the game, right? And that's what's true with the triangle. All 3 points in the sky are talking to each other. And in that triangle, in that talking to each other configuration, you've got Pluto. Little tiny planet far, far away. You remember him, right? Or we call him a dwarf planet now, I suppose. Astrologers call everything planets, though, just so you know. Pluto, Mr. Intensity, Mr. Life and Death, Mr. Transformation, Mr. Underworld, and the skyland of revolution by the people, right? Second, another point in this triangle, you've got Uranus, Mr. Revolution, Mr. Sudden Change. He's hanging out now in the skyland of ideas. You've got Neptune, Mr. Dream, Mr. Delusion, Mr. Fantasy, Mr. Misinformation, and the skyland of action and war. And for most of this time, real nearby, you've also got Saturn, Mr. Consequences, doing the same back and forth doorway dance with Neptune. Those two together are their own movie. Right? So you can see why for years astrologers were like, oh shit, what is that gonna be like, right? So that's the background music here. Sometimes loud when the angles get precise, sometimes mellow when the angles kind of fall away a little bit, but always there for 2025 and 2026. I told you it's gonna peak in February of 26, but it's not gonna go, it's gonna go away. It's really not gonna start to disassemble until just before the election in the United States in 2028. And this week, you guessed it, it was a loud time, right? Because the angles got more precise. Okay. So while those angles are more precise, while that configuration is more loud than quiet, we also had this week something else happening. 3 other bodies crossed into new skylands. This all started on the tent revival, I Hate My Enemies Sunday at the Kirk Memorial. At that moment, the sun and the moon are at the same spot at 29 degrees of a skyland, right? Hovering on the precipice together. Then on Monday, the day of the silly Tylenol announcement and the Kimmel announcement, the sun, who emphasizes and brightens and calls things to the surface, slips in to a new skyland, to 0 degrees of a skyland. When this movement happens, the sun enters into this new skyland, and he is immediately, as one would be, caught up in the great flying wedge. Remember, anything that gets to a doorway, anything that starts interacting at those early degrees is suddenly interacting with the wedge. So the sun finds itself directly opposite Neptune, shining a light on collective delusion, collective hope, right? And making them both loud and hot. So you end up with the Kimmel announcement and the Tylenol announcement. You've got delusion, strengthening, brightening, but also kind of being in a spotlight where everybody's like, what? What? Right? And you've got the spotlight on Kimmel where everybody's like, oh, we have some magic here. We have some power here, right? So then on Tuesday, Trump's at the UN railing against literally the rest of the world, and we're waiting for Kimmel's monologue. On that day, you guys, Mars, Mr. Aggression, Mr. War, Mr. Do Something, would you please, steps to the doorway of his new skyland. This one is a place of passion, of magnetism, of secrets, and I kid you not, vengeance. And from that land of vengeance and passion, Mars makes a square that's a 90-degree angle, a tense, unhappy angle with the Pluto part of the wedge. So now you've got Mars, Mr. Action, in a tense who's going to give arm wrestle with transformation and intensity. How uncomfortable for the rest of us watching, right? Wasn't that day, that UN day, one of the days this week where you were like, what in the entire world? What is the timeline that I have found myself living in? Can somebody save me, right? Mom, my roommate in college and I used to do that. We used to lie in our beds and pretend moms could hear us if we yelled loud enough. We would just lie there and go, Mom. She didn't come. Okay. So, guys, then on the ICE detention shooting Wednesday, where the vice president of the United States calls a podcaster a dipshit across the ever spiraling downward internet, we had the moon join Mars at that doorway. So the thing in the sky that, yes, rules our tides and our feminine cycles, but it also rules our emotions, the moon rules our emotions, joins up with this bombastic combo of Mars and Pluto with their fists trying to decide if this is a Cold War or a hot one, trying to decide who and how this thing is going to resolve, because I'm not giving in. Well, I'm not giving in, right? So Mars in Scorpio is like this warrior operating in secret. He's the hidden dagger, the strategic use of power, squaring off with Pluto in Aquarius, transforming collective structures. So then Thursday, the moon moves on, but these two are still standing there, eye to eye, wondering who, if anyone, is going to throw a punch, right? The moon is like, I'm emotionally exhausted by what you guys are doing. I'm heading off to the next adventure, right? So he leaves, but Pluto, Mr. Intensity, and Mars, Mr. Masculine Motion, are staring each other down, frozen mid-bar fight. All the other patrons went home. The lights are on, and they're still staring at each other across the table, right? Something has got to give. Something has got to progress. The climax of the novel awaits, and someone is going to have to make this a bigger deal than it was. Who will do that? You guessed it, our president. They put out that crazy memo making it wrong to think people deserve equal rights under the law. And they charged the president's enemy with perjury for some detail and some congressional testimony 5 years ago to the day. As if the man is a liar. He's not. I'll save you the trouble of listening to 17 legal podcasts that came out over the weekend, right? So he's not a liar, right? And they're also acting as if their own officials don't lie to Congress every day, right? But guys, think of the week as a pressure cooker, okay? For the purposes of this story, think of that flying wedge for the purposes of today's story as a pressure cooker. So it's sitting there on the stove. Then the sun arrives, and now you've got a flame. The sun is there trying to illuminate the truth, and Neptune, straight above it, is creating this fog and confusion. So now it's like heating from the bottom, hot air inside the balloon, right? Pressure cooker starts heating up, right? With all that hot air, almost like a hot air balloon inside that pressure cooker. I know I'm mixing my metaphors, but it starts inflating, right? And then Mars, this key ingredient, and the moon, this emotional detail, just make that situation so much more intense. Okay, so we've been talking about this flying wedge for a while, right? And this week, what was the new key ingredient to that? It's Mars and Scorpio squaring with Pluto at one of these key angles. So what can we learn from other times that Mars is in Scorpio, squaring, tensing up and arguing with, arm wrestle posture with Pluto and Aquarius. What happens if we look at the last time these two planets sat at a 90-degree angle from these two skylands? When was the last time that happened? Okay, so the last time these two were in these skylands having this argument was during those wild revolutionary years between 1779 and 1796. Remember that Pluto's journey around the sun is about 248 years, which is why he's just now at the same spot he was when America was born, right? And it's also why he is now back, all the way back around to the skyland of Aquarius. He has returned to that same neighborhood where he was for the Haitian, French, and American revolutions. And now that he's there, his interactions with Mars are going to be, for the duration, until like the mid 40s for us, a bit more impactful on the people, the collective, the revolutionary capacity of us all, right? So this was the first square in these skylands since the last time a bunch of folks were like, actually, I don't want to live this way. So let's look at a few of those moments and see if we see a pattern of intense power struggles, revolutionary transformation, and conflicts between established power and collective liberation. Established power, collective liberation. First one, in January of 1779, Mars is in Scorpio, squaring Pluto and Aquarius for the first time in about 250 years. The Continental Army, Washington's army, has just finished the fight at Valley Forge. That was their darkest hour of starvation and disease through which they trained somehow while suffering. And they fortified and they sort of learned how to codify and become an army while they were there. So they had proved a new level of substance and coherence at the Battle of Monmouth, which was tested, I should say, at the Battle of Monmouth. So the leaders of the revolution gather in that winter of 79, and in January, they decide, when this square is happening, they decide to hand total authority of the armed forces over to Washington. So their suffering has officially been stamped as having transformed into hardened determination. They are no longer some ragtag militia. They have been officially pressure cooked into an actual army. The next one happens in 1780. So these two, Mars and Pluto, are squaring from these skylands. Benedict Arnold's treason is exposed. The betrayal cuts deep, but it is also clarifying. The British shift their strategy south. So the war we end up sort of heading into the south with this war. The war becomes increasingly brutal. Neighbors start fighting neighbors, right? The pressure is building. It's a turning point, a pressure building turning point. The next one is 1782. So Mars and Pluto are squaring again from these skylands. The war is technically over. Peace articles have just been signed in the Treaty of Paris, but the news hasn't reached America yet, right? So the violence therefore continues. But veterans are threatening revolt over unpaid wages. The pressured feeling of what the hell happens now is almost worse than the war itself. Does that sound familiar to you? Now in 1784, it happens again. Check this one out. So Congress has not yet assembled. There's only 4 states present, even though we're 20 days into a called assembly. Without that external threat of war against the British, it's almost impossible to get a quorum. So you've got this collective paralysis. Say it again. You've got this collective paralysis and the breakdown of familiar power structures, right? So there's this man, Richard Henry Lee, who is leading the Congress, president of the Congress, it was called, writes to James Madison. And he says, you guys, we need a constitutional convention. Like, we've got to articulate some new plan for this country. This, of course, led to a moment years later. We have one more turn on the road, right? But years later, this is the first step towards that U.S. Constitution being written and codified. So you see how these tense angular turning points kind of force a necessary shift, right? November of 1786, finally, during the Mars square Pluto in these skylands, we see the Shays Rebellion, in which armed farmers, the farmers are now well armed and trained in Massachusetts, shutting down courts to prevent foreclosures on their farms. They are literally rebelling against the government they had just fought to create. This becomes the breaking point that leads directly to the Constitutional Convention. Isn't that amazing? Do you see the pattern? Each Mars-Pluto square pushed the colonists past another threshold, from protest to resistance, from resistance to revolution, from revolution to nation building. So they weren't gradually evolving. They were being pressure cooked through breaking points, turning points into something entirely new. And now, September 26, 2025, Mars square Pluto, again, same aspects, same signs, same pressure. But this time, it's not about becoming independent from Britain. It's about what kind of nation we're going to be, whether democracy survives, whether we explode or we transform. Okay, so what meaning can we make of this for our own purposes? So this idea of pressure towards a turning point got me thinking. There's a public leadership and change management scholar out of Harvard named Ron Heifetz, who uses the pressure cooker as a metaphor for how transformation happens within organizations that need changing. He says leaders need to create what he calls productive disequilibrium, enough pressure to force change, but not so much that everything explodes. As Heifetz puts it, set the temperature and pressure too low, and you stand no chance of transforming ingredients in the cooker into a good meal. You set the temperature too high, and it'll blow off the cooker's top, right? That's exactly what we're experiencing. Trump is turning up the heat, but he has no idea what he's doing. He has no idea how to manage the pressure towards a productive transformation of a country. A lot of people signed up for him believing he could provide that sort of transformation with integrity. But he's just cranking up the dial to maximum, right? So no regulation, no release valve, no container, as Heifetz calls it, to hold the events and the people inside it towards a new safe way of being together, right? Just maximum pressure. So then here's what I think is crucial to understand. Trump is not, therefore, the leader in Heifetz's model who would cause a healthy and lasting change. He is just a change agent. He is not the chef managing the pressure cooker. He's just the guy. He's just the agent of chaos who found the temperature dial and doesn't understand that too much heat destroys everything. He is performing the function. We can talk 20 years from now about whether it needed to be like this, right? But he's performing the function of creating the pressure. But he is not providing the necessary wisdom about that transformation, right? So this, of course, means that we, to use Heifetz's term, have to become the adaptive leaders here. We are both the ingredients being transformed and the one who needs to manage our own transformation because our president does not have the capacity for that management. So Reich's sleeping giant awakening is not some external force, it's us. Finally, feeling the activation, finally beginning to understand that we have to collectively manage this pressure before the lid blows off. Y'all, we are in the same exact cosmic weather that transformed colonists into revolutionaries, the same Mars square Pluto that turned suffering into determination in 1779, that turned economic depression into constitutional convention in 1786. The pressure either destroys or transforms. There is no third option. In 1786, farmers are asking, how much pressure can we take before we break? That question led to Shays Rebellion, which led to the Constitutional Convention, which led to the system of government we are now trying to resurrect and finally, once and for all, make right. The cosmic pressure is nearing maximum. Trump has cranked the heat almost as high as it'll go. The question is not whether we'll change. We are changing. We all feel it. We can all see it, right? The question is whether we manage the transformation collectively, allow the thing to maintain its integrity, despite the decaying systems that come with this configuration, right? The configuration brings cracks in the system. Do we let it explode destructively? Heather Cox Richardson likes to say that movements are caused by ideas. And the ideas that are emerging from this pressure are simple. We are the ones who have to lead ourselves through it. Not Trump, not any strongman, not any external savior. The cavalry is not coming. It's us together, managing our own pressure, managing our own heat, managing our own transformation, our own cry for freedom and justice, our own pressure on the broken system itself. That sounds lovely, Kate. What on earth do we do, right? I'm only one person and I have about as much military training as those farmers did. When the war began, I am not looking to spend a starving winter at Valley Forge. Thank you very much. There is a new season of the pit in the making. So what wisdom can we glean from prose or poetry, from those who face such things? Let's take a look. As we turn to literature, I want to name something. I feel afraid. I feel afraid of speaking, afraid of staying silent, afraid of leaving, afraid of doing nothing, afraid of doing too much. I don't know. If you're feeling this paralysis too, this sense that every option feels dangerous, you are not alone. This fear is actually information about the pressure we are all under. Thomas Paine wrote during the last Mars-Pluto squares, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman." He understood that pressure reveals character, that breaking points show us who we really are. Mary Parker Follett, an early scholar on org change and behavior, writing in the 20s about power and transformation, distinguished between power over and power with. She wrote, "Power over is a thing of the past. Power with is what we need to understand. It's power that multiplies through connection rather than diminishes through domination." That's what this Homeland Security memorandum, criminalizing extremism on race and gender, really is. It's the death throes of power over. They can only imagine power as domination, as forcing submission. But we're building power with, the kind that grows when neighbors know each other's names, when communities share resources, when we refuse to let fear separate us. Starhawk, who writes about collective organizing, put it this way: "Power over comes from the barrel of a gun. Power with comes from the circle of hands holding each other up. One breaks things, the other makes things." The pressure cooker we're in, Trump is using power over to recklessly crank up the heat. He is meeting with the nation's generals, theoretically to fire a bunch of them, is sort of one of the ideas folks have about this meeting. As I record this, he meets with them, turning the pressure up more, one way or another. We can use power with to manage the transformation, not through confrontation, but through connection, not through force, but through care. Paulo Freire understood this kind of power. He said, "Washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful, not to be neutral." But fighting doesn't mean violence. It means refusing to let power over be the only kind of power that matters. Every mutual aid network we build, every neighbor we check on, every skill we share, that's power with. It doesn't look like much compared to federal forces and criminal indictments, but every single empire that over-relied on power over crumbled under its own weight eventually. And power with amongst the people only accelerates that crumbling. We are the line, y'all. We are the rampart. The pressure is real. The fear is real. We're not trying to seize power over. We're building a power with. And that kind of power, it doesn't break under pressure. It doesn't crumble. It transforms. Pluto in Aquarius, I promise you, wants that for us, wants us to transform. enough to move collectively in search of a better way, organizing human life, a better way than we've made so far here in this country. And Mars in Scorpio is saying, y'all, you're just going to take this? No, Mr. Mars, no, we aren't. We aren't. We can't. We shan't. So what do we do then? What do we do with this understanding, with this feeling that the square is giving us, this feeling of pressure, of needing to act? So what do we do? When traditional in-the-street protests carry real risks and don't seem to work right now, the Mars-Pluto square demands action, but smart action. Here's how we channel this transformative energy. First, we strengthen our community connections. I know I sound repetitive when I say that, but mutual aid networks have proven their power during COVID and beyond, supporting neighbors, creating essential safety nets. We start simple. We organize a weekly coffee with 3 to 5 neighbors. We build real relationships. We figure out who in our circle, who in our bubble, right? Remember the bubbles? Who has medical training? Who speaks multiple languages? Who has a spare room? Who has tech capacity? These connections become lifelines when systems fail. I understand that this feels like an insane conversation for your next wine night, but guys, this is where we are. There are a ton of resources online about creating mutual aid networks. Please look it up and please think about it. We are not trying to overthrow anything. We are building the community connections that have always gotten people through hard times. When the official systems strain, as they absolutely will, they've been defunded, they've been unstaffed, right? So when official systems fail, communities that know each other, trust each other, and support each other survive and even thrive. Think of this like preparing for a hurricane that's definitely coming, but you don't know exactly when. You don't panic, but you prepare. You check on neighbors, you stock supplies, know your evacuation routes, have backup plans. Except this storm is political, right? Economic and social. Do you have a Civil War closet? Do you have a physical map? Do you have solar chargers for your phones? Do you have extra antibiotics? Okay, I'll stop. Do you have water? Just let's not be hysterical. Let's be thoughtful. The pressure cooker is leading us somewhere. Like, let's just be the smart people in the novel who saw it coming, who prepared, right? The pressure cooker energy of this Mars-Pluto square wants transformation. Transformation doesn't have to mean revolution. It can mean evolution. Small circles of people supporting each other through the hard patches of this process, skills being shared, resources being pooled, communities becoming more self-sufficient and more self-protective, right? What have you done to build those relationships across lines of difference, across socioeconomic lines, across racial lines, across immigration status lines? That's our purview now, today. The cosmic pressure is real, but we manage it together, not through confrontation, but through connection, through preparation, not through resistance, but through resilience. The same communities have always survived difficult times by turning towards each other instead of away. Do you remember the blackout in New York City in 2003? How it was an all hands community response? How there were barbecues in the street? Do you remember that? I have to assume it was on TV. We know how to do this, y'all. Remember in 1786, most people weren't revolutionaries. They were neighbors, helping neighbors navigate impossible pressures until something shifted. Be that neighbor. Build those connections, create those alternatives, make more friends. Even when you are painfully introverted, as I am, the transformation does happen one conversation, one skill share, one mutual aid network, one stored gallon of water at a time. I just feel tired of being surprised, tired of being afraid. Let's be thoughtful and planful and realistic at this point. Let's stop waiting for the cavalry and acknowledge the pressure, not to be intimidated by it, but to begin to allow our bodies to move with it. Because we are being affected too, not just by these people and their base cruelty and their greed, but by the planets. That same square ran through your house and your body. without all their bullshit. You too are being pressurized in your own life. Notice where, honor where. Where are you feeling it? Where are you noticing the heat and the intensity picking up? Where are you noticing your own short temper, your own emotionality, your own brewing resistance to something that hasn't been right, your own reaction to power over in your own life, your own desire for power with in your own life? Allow that pressure to move you, to move your behavior, to move your thinking, to move your plans. And finally, I want to leave you with a poem. It's a poem called An Old Story by a Harvard poetry professor, Tracy K. Smith. She starts by saying, "We were made to understand it would be terrible." Here's how she ends it. "A long age passed, when at last we knew how little would survive us, how little we had mended or built that was not now lost. Something large and old awoke, and then our singing brought on a different manner of weather. Then animals, long believed gone, crept down from the trees. We took new stock of one another. We wept to be reminded of such color." This is what can happen here, right? After the melee, we can sit in our own metaphorical town square and watch the animals come back down the mountain. We wept to be reminded of such color. We can feel that way again, y'all. We are living through the exact cosmic weather that birthed American democracy. Mars and Scorpio square Pluto and Aquarius. That same aspect that transformed colonists into revolutionaries, that turned 13 separate colonies into something new. That pressure was and is real. Thursday's memorandum and the indictment of James Comey, that's the heat. Pretty close to maximum. The Daily Caller calling for blood. Portland deployment calling all the generals. The lid is rattling on the stove. But here's what history tells us. Mars-Pluto squares don't create gradual change. They create breaking points where the intolerable becomes revolution. In 1786, farmers shutting down courts led to a constitutional convention. Is that where this round of Pluto-Mars squares is leading as well? In 2025 and 2026, what will our series of breaking points create? Reich says the giant is awakening. Richardson says movements are made of ideas. The cosmic weather says transformation is not just possible, but inevitable when pressure reaches this level. Your fear right now, that's not weakness. That's revolutionary information. That's your body rising to the moment and telling you we are at or quite near the breaking point. The question is, what do we do with it, with that ancient knowing that we feel in our bones? If you would like to understand how these patterns are affecting your personal chart, your personal life, how your own breaking points connect to this collective transformation, I offer readings that can help you navigate your unique relationship with this weather, with this pressure. My email is in the episode description. Please do write a review because it helps the thing grow. And it also makes me want to keep going. When you tell me what's working and why, it really helps me. And tell me what's not working. I would love to hear that too. I am a Virgo after all. So if you're not going to supply some criticism, I will have to come up with my own. Me and the clown guys will have to come up with problems. But listen, until next time, remember, the pressure cooker is real, the heat is near maximum, and history, both American and planetary, says that this is when everything starts to change. The last time this happened, colonists became Americans. This time, we get to become something we haven't even imagined yet. So until next time, be well, be conscious, and be kind. I will see you soon.